This is only the second time I've ever gone live.
Oh, I feel so privileged. How about that?
Yes, I'm really excited.
Now, how
I'm
many
coming live from my car because my daughter's in gymnastics right now.
perfect timing. And you're in Las Vegas, correct? Or in Nevada?
Yes. Yep.
Actually,
Nevada.
Nevada. Am I mispronouncing?
Yes.
I don't know how long you have been following me, but I have articulation issues. So I bank on that when I cannot get my words out. I'm like, oh, there's my kid stuff coming through. Although that
Yeah.
one,
No. That's a very common. That's one of our local Nevadans pet peeve because most of the people say Nevada, but it's Nevada.
huh, and then I did not know that actually. I did not know
Oh,
that.
yeah. So
All
funny.
right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Um,
I do have some more people on here.
I'm assuming that it is okay that that we record this and then I do put it on YouTube. You're good with all
Oh,
of it. You're very transparent.
absolutely.
So why don't you? Of course, I know you as Danny. I'm assuming that is your real name,
Okay, so sorry, I just blocked someone real quick. So my real name is Danides, Danides,
Danides.
and it's spelled Danyris.
Oh yes, I have seen that. Yes.
So that's why Danny is spelled, I guess what is typically seen as a boy, the boy way, and not with an I. And then I also shortened it because Danides right now, well, not right now, for a while now, everyone's connected it to Daenerys with Game of Thrones, and
And up until the
that's
last, it was really cool.
oh, and we were this close. Well, I kept begging my husband. I was like, come on, let me give. I was pregnant with Nayeli, and I was this close to giving her Khaleesi as one of her middle names, and my husband's like, well, and then we didn't, and then although in the end, I guess it just shows how powerful or how much trauma affects you, right?
That is true. We're one of the famous expressions. What is it? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
So, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell people about your kind of basic demographics of who you are, and a little bit about your story.
Okay, so my name is Denides. I'm in good old Las Vegas, Nevada. Um, and I was born and raised here. I have three kids, ages 5, 8, and 11. The two oldest are boys. And I am 46. So I started a little bit later, especially for being with the Mexican background. Started way late. Nobody ever thought I was going to have kids. Because I had our oldest when I was 34.
Yeah,
A
definitely
little
is.
over 34. Yeah. And so also with me being Hispanic, my very first language is Spanish. I learned English I can remember being pulled out in first grade for the ESL classes. And my mother also learned English along with me, like going through kindergarten and watching Sesame Street with me. And so we both learned English at the same time. And so my parents were from Mexico. I'm a first generation. Well, kind of first generation on my father's side. My grandfather was born in Colorado, but then was raised in Mexico. And then he brought my dad and his siblings over. How did I get this thing to stop? And so there's that. And then my trauma story is and then in my jobs. So my current full-time job is blackjack dealer at the best casino, the Cosmopolitan. Um
Cool.
and I got into dealing 16 years ago. I can't even believe that it's been 16 years. And the only reason why I got into dealing was because I got to be a part of the Playboy Club, which at the time was the only Playboy Club in the world. And so that was really awesome. And then I ended up at the Cosmo, which is like one of the top casinos. And I am segueing into the public speaking for the Be Seen and Heard curriculum, written by my amazing boss, Victor Pacini, who who has turned his story into this amazing curriculum. And the curriculum was written to fulfill Aaron's Law. And Aaron's Law is in 38 states right now. And it states that public schools need to have a developmentally appropriate information and preventative for in order to prevent and awareness for childhood sexual abuse. It's the purpose is to first teach the children that they have body autonomy, empowering them, what an inappropriate touch is. And again, all developmentally, we do from pre-K up to 12th grade. And the little ones all hear safe touch, safe secret, unsafe secret. So it's the great thing about our program too is we have an awesome parents night, informational night. So with this public speaking so far, the only speaking I've done for the curriculum has been informational nights on Parents Night in Spanish for the Spanish speaking parents in a California district called Mountain View School. And then we also do a human trafficking. And so I did a parents informational night on the human trafficking. And something that I have found that is so great about our parents information night. Because I mean, I remember when I was younger, and even from my now sixth grader when he was in fifth grade, bringing home his health sex ed paper. It's just one sheet, kind of tells you a brief description of what they'll learn, and you sign it. We have we will show the parents what their kids are going to learn, what they're going to see. So there's absolutely nothing left to the imagination. So no one can assume what we are teaching their children, because people jump to many conclusions and assumptions when it comes on to this topic of the childhood sexual abuse. The second objective of Aaron's Law is to also, when it does, if it does happen, or if they know of a friend, who they can go to and how to speak up about it. And then also to teach teachers and guardians and anyone that works with kids to look for the signs, and also hopefully they can be someone trusted for these children to go to. I'm the only Spanish speaking presenter so far, and I'm working really hard to get our curriculum here in Las Vegas. It's so much needed, and I'm really working hard on getting a presentation, because right now what we're trying to do is just get a school to host us and allow us to maybe live stream, or have some other principals or counselors from other schools in Las Vegas come and visit and watch the presentation, and we can do a full day of presentations. And I really want to start off at this school that we've been talking to, and hopefully it works out, because that was a school that I attended when most of my abuse happened. And so I feel like it would be a great, you know,
Yes.
little
Have you
little
thought
comeback around.
doing some TikToks on it, and either doing little bits of information from the curriculum through TikTok, and then do a live stream on to show it that
Um,
we
well,
target?
that would have to be my boss's choice, because it's written by him and it's a copywritten. So, I mean, I do talk about it. I have talked about it in my TikToks, because the book he wrote, Be Seen and Heard, which is also part of the curriculum, and how I found out about all of this, because so part of my trauma story is my earliest memories of sexual abuse by my paternal uncle is from age 4. Now, knowing what I know now, I'm pretty certain it started much younger. And not that my parents were leaving me. He and my mom were the same age. My parents weren't leaving me with him to be babysat. They were leaving me with grandma. This man to this day is 63 years old, has never moved out of mommy and daddy's house. And so he lived there. And, my grandma would turn on the TV and watch her novela. And he would be like, hey, let's watch cartoons in my room. So it was that grooming. And by the time I was 9, the summer of 9, right before I turned 10, I'd been abused by 6 different people. Of the 6, only one was a stranger. And that happened at a Kmart, which is crazy, in the children's book aisle. 2 were teenage female babysitters. and then three were family members, and of the six, two were adults. The other were it was again something that's not discussed often is child on child sexual abuse. And the craziest part is that my most aggressive, violent, angry abuser was a 13-year-old girl,
Hmm.
which so it was yeah. So that's really interesting, right? Because we always focus on the men, and we always focus on um even the boys. You're worried about the hormonal teenage boys, with but it was the teenage girl that was the most vicious, which again, now in retrospect, I fully believe by then she knew exactly what she was doing, but clearly she had experienced,
Some tra-
um,
yeah.
yeah, I can't even imagine what she had experienced because,
I don't know how it
but
is in your state, but in our state, child on child is considered reportable. And the reportability is not about holding the offending child um, criminally, but to investigate the offending child to see what their history is so that they can get help as well. So there are, I won't say that 100% of the cases go that way because some cases, and I'm not, I actually have never figured out which ones end up going to law enforcement and which ones are just handled. In our state, our it's Department of Children and Families is the one who does the investigating. um, I can never tell because I've had cases where the offender wholeheartedly admitted to full on penetration and nothing happened to him. And then I had another young man who, and not to minimize, but it was fondling, and he went away for 2 years. Both openly admitted to being offenders, and so I can't. Both were in the same county. Both I had to refer because of the age difference and some power dynamics that were involved.
right.
I did get law enforcement involved right away. Um, and yet and so always say to parents, look, I'm required to report this. And frankly, I can't tell you what's going to happen. I'll support you along all the way, whether I'm working with the teenager or whether I'm working with the child, I'll support whoever
Mhm.
I need to support. That's
Right.
so.
Did they also have the same judges?
No, it was determined through the state's attorney's office whether they
Oh,
prosecute or not. So before he even got to that level. And
wow.
Christine, I don't know if Florida has Aaron's Law. Frankly, I do know
They
that
don't, because
they.
I looked it up and they don't.
Thank you for doing that, because we have the whole "don't say gay" law. They're not allowed to talk about any sexuality stuff between K through third grade.
Right.
Curriculum, right, is about protecting the child, but you would have to talk about some of those elements. So it's interesting. It's just interesting. Of course, we have the whole drag show drama as well, right? Because we're supposedly sexualizing children through. So it's the incongruencies
Have
of
you
some.
read my shirt?
It's backwards.
It says protect trans kids
There you go.
because that's, yeah, it's terrible.
So, could you tell us a little bit about how your trauma impacted your adult life?
So, I did not realize, for me, my trauma really didn't impact me until I got pregnant. Um, okay, let me rephrase that. I didn't realize how much my trauma had impacted me until I got pregnant with our oldest. Because then, through that lens, I was able to go back and be like, oh my gosh, that's why it led to this situation. So I didn't realize it. So I felt like through my 20s, even early 30s, it was just like it hadn't until I got pregnant and I had to protect a new life. And then I went through a really hard time of obsessive thoughts of, will I become an abuser? So I started obsessively searching out stories, articles, anything on abused kids and who abused them and why. And just because I had gone to therapy before I was pregnant, but my therapy never focused on my abuse for some reason. Like, after my father died, I had really big anxiety. So my anxiety focused on that. But again, it started way before that. It started way before that. It was just my father's death that really like broke the camel's back. Um, and just and then I was married once. I got married when I mean, I'm married now, happily married for 13 years, and
Hey,
that's who I have my three babies with. But I was married in my early 20s, and after that divorce, it was really hard on me. So I went to therapy, but it just focused on the divorce and the marriage. It never went back, because even I now, again, in retrospect, I see how my childhood also affected that, decisions made
so
there. And
well,
actually, the decisions I think also made there, though, because at times, I'm like, oh, did I make it too quick? But at the same time, because I feel like my mother waited a long time with my biological father. He was abusive and alcoholic.
oh no.
I was, and not that my ex-husband was abusive or alcoholic at all. It was just my boundary was like, you cross my boundary, then I'm done. I'm not going to allow you to cross two or three or four, you know. So,
So you actually
but
pulled your tolerance level. Actually, you were intolerant of it because you weren't going to do it a second time. That
right.
so, but you did see how
I guess. And
most.
so uh
Were you able to see how your
oh, I'm sorry you cut out.
I was just wondering about the impact of the. Well, one is, did the therapist ever ask you the question? Do you have a history of trauma?
No, but every therapist, I started with that. I would start with the so I was sexually abused as a kid. My father was a violent alcoholic. My stepfather that raised me the few years after that was a verbally abusive, and but they never, it was really weird. Not until I got pregnant, because then all of a sudden I got very mad at my mom. So, I know you had asked a question yesterday when I was on your live, like tipping points in my life. And I would say there have been, a sprinkle of a few throughout. And one of my first was standing up to my uncle and asking him to stop. But then I didn't speak up about the abuse for at least another 2 years. So one of my first tipping points would be that. The second one was my mom telling my mom.
Okay, that's a powerful story because I got to hear that. So
Oh,
you actually stood up to your uncle.
so, okay, so here's the thing with my uncle. My abuse received from him was never scary. So this is also it was never scary because he obviously he groomed me. He used cartoons, he used
Typical.
um things like that. And one night I wasn't quite in school yet. He was cutting, I'm assuming now, I'm like, this must have been his MO, because I remembered him like cuddling up and then me saying in my little, I remember being sing-songy about it. If you do that or if you kiss me, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. And again, I'm wondering if he ever used to say to me like, I'll be your friend if,
Yeah, yeah.
we can be friends if. So, and then the second time that was
And and I know that was a long time ago, but do you have a thought as to like what made you say that? Like, okay,
I
because like
just didn't like it.
you just didn't
I
like.
just didn't like it. I didn't like when he kissed me like that. I didn't like it. And I can remember feeling that ick about it and just being like, oh no. And, that was the first thing. Oh, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. And I'm assuming, too, that I was, you know, treated as the favorite niece or whatnot. And, I'm sure I thought I was hurting his feelings by saying I wouldn't be friends anymore. And I was using that as the
And
power. So
that particular situation, he respected you, which is a little.
yes, yes, and I think and I wouldn't quite say respect. I would say feared that maybe now I would be able to that I would speak up, because if I am now starting to say no to him, does that mean that I can turn around and speak to someone else about it? So I think he was more afraid of getting caught. And another time, gosh, and then I think at this time my parents did leave. There was another time that we were that the abuse was interrupted. It was about to start and it was interrupted, and then that was the last time. And I think because I also said um the person who interrupted was another uncle, and I think I said something like, "Oh, Theo, I'm so glad you're here," or something. And again, giving the other uncle an indication that, oh, she might be speaking up soon. Because also what I have found out is that he abused his own sister, my aunt, and she was about my age, I think, when it stopped also, because not only did my grandma find out, which she ended up blaming my 5-year-old, at the time was 5-year-old aunt, about the abuse her own 10-year-old brother was inflicting on her. Um, and so maybe he was like, oh, someone told on me before. Maybe this one will now, because now I'm, actually saying no. But I know I've had flashbacks another time where I know I hid from him when, like, my grandma left me alone. She went to the store or something. And I hid in the bathtub. And I remember hearing in the hallway, like, no, I can't find her. I haven't been able to find her. And hearing my grandma be like, oh my gosh. And then me jumping out of the bathtub and coming out of the bathroom going, here I am.
Mm.
And not trying to figure out, like, I guess, everyone just thinks, oh, she's a kid. She was playing hide and seek. But I
Yeah.
can remember that I was just hiding from him. But yeah. So I don't know how that so like my mom said she never could tell because I was never afraid of him and I was always still willing, but again because it wasn't ever done in a scary way. And at up in my parents got divorced. I think I was almost 6, and my dad was a violent alcoholic. He was never violent towards me, but he was very violent towards her. So her thing too was, if you had a personality change, I thought it was because you just watched your dad, punch the heck out of me. And then now it's the next morning and I'm trying to take you to school. So
Sending that as
she,
if it never happened.
right. So she couldn't, there was so much already happening at home that she couldn't tell something different was happening, because kids would have the same reaction whether they're, seeing the abuse or being sexually abused, whether they retreat, get quieter or more cautious, or, jumpy. Because then it was, that was my thing too. I was jumpy all the time at nights, especially because then that's when my dad would come home. But I think, yeah. And so then the weird, my other tipping point is when I spoke up to my mom and I was 7 years old. And I think this also led to some of the resilience, because my mom believed me. She believed me right away. And we did call the police. Absolutely nothing happened, though. They went over there. And then, so although my mother supported me there, and again, there wasn't as much information in 1982 when this happened, or 1983, but no, 83 is when I spoke up, 83-ish. And
But number one protective factor is being believed by a parent. So kudos to your mom. And again, we understand, especially if it's a loved one, like if it had been her brother versus her brother-in-law, you might have had a different response. But how amazing, right? Even in 1982, where we did not talk about these things, and yet your mother believed you. I mean that, and again, you're probably right. I think it speaks a lot to probably where your resilience comes from. And two, I have to say, because I don't typically hear this, is your ability to be able to use your voice. And I love the fact that your name is Danny Has a Voice, but you had a voice at 5,
yes,
right? Able to say and to be clever enough to use the right words to know to scare him, to be able to set that boundary. So meaning there
I
probably
guess I remember that.
internal, you probably have some natural internal resilience. We talk about that, that there is, that we do believe that there is a geneticness to resilience, and you probably have some of that, which gives you those skill sets. And so I do find it very interesting, though, that a therapist never connected those dots, right? Here are your two biggest traumas, right? The sexual abuse trauma, and the physical violence in the home trauma under the age of 6, by the way. And none of that really is. It just, I find that very interesting. Hopefully, our field is a little bit better these days about that than when you were seeking out treatment, although it wasn't that long ago, right? Because you,
No, but I have found, yes, I found someone that it, I still haven't found someone that I've connected with long enough because then insurance changes and things like that. So I kind of keep repeating some parts of that therapy over and over again. But again, um, it doesn't hurt because I do, even though I've heard the same way to, work through triggers, I might hear something a little bit different, or this therapist might offer it up in a different way. So, I'm still open to that, but I have friends that have luckily been able to have like the same therapist through like the very beginning, unraveling all that, and then learning how to, because again, something that's been tough has been learning how to parent through all this. Because again, so like I said, when I got pregnant, all of these stuff came back, and part of that was also um so after my uncle, then I was abused at Kmart. My mom was going to the layaway line. I convinced her to leave me at the toy aisle, and she was like, all right, I can see you, you can't move, you can't go anywhere. Okay, I won't. Well, then I felt it in what I remember is this man actually resembled my uncle. And so I looked at him and I was like, oh, and he was too close and there were people there. But then I ended up changing aisles because then I wasn't sure if he was following me. And then we ended up in the children book aisle all by ourselves. And then he exposed himself. Um, yeah. And then we were luckily interrupted by my mom screaming for me because she went back to the aisle and I wasn't there. And so part of the reason why I didn't say anything, because I hadn't disclosed to my uncle yet, but I didn't say anything that time because I thought I was going to get in trouble. I moved away from where I
right?
said I wouldn't.
Yes.
But at the same time, I was moving away because I was trying to get away from him. And then feeling like, well, maybe if I would have listened and stayed, then that wouldn't have happened because my mom was so close. Like,
Right.
you go through all that. But
And you actually recall having that thought at 7 years old. I mean,
it's so crazy. Actually, that happened around 5.
or at
That happened
5.
around 5 years old. Because my parents were still married. They were still together, and I hadn't disclosed to my uncle. And I didn't disclose about him until I was 7. And I think and by then my parents had been divorced. My mom had gotten remarried. And I'm assuming that I just finally felt safe. And one day,
It's interesting because there's Kohlberg's theory on moral development. I don't know if you know much about that, but
mm-mm,
it's basically a 3-step process. Although there are subcategories in each of the three, so really there are 6 stages, but they say three with two subcategories in each one. And the very first stage is black and white thinking, like what's right is right and what is wrong is wrong. And so you were definitely in that first stage of like, I did something wrong. So if something bad happened, I had to be responsible for it. And therefore, and it's really important to understand the development because sometimes we feel guilty, like I should have spoken up when we start shaming ourselves. But when we understand development and how our thinking is developmental, it literally changes over time. I mean, as you know, with infants, they don't have what we call object permanency, meaning if I
right,
cup, right? And if I were to hide the cup is no longer there. That doesn't happen until about 18 months, years of age, where they realize, oh, they'll actually reach for the cup even though they can't see it. Those are developmental changes. Well, moral development is one of those as well. And that's where you were. So just understand. And what's the other thing that's interesting is a lot of very deviant perpetrators understand these things and they will use that in order to be able to keep the child quiet.
right. You're going to get in trouble because you accepted the candy. You're going to get in trouble because you went with me. Or like what happened to my aunt, she did get in trouble because she accepted the money from her brother
Yeah.
so that he could kiss her, so that he could, because my grandma's mentality was very
Well, hopefully we've learned.
anti-victim.
And
I don't know. Although she
so
loved me very much though.
So you wanted to share some other tipping points?
So, yes. So the when I got up until I got pregnant, my mom had only known about my uncle, and that was because after I told about my uncle, yes, I got the supportive, I believe you, but also she instantly started crying and throwing up.
Mm.
So when the other things happened, and also I'm not sure if I thought like I knew it was very wrong when an adult did that, and maybe I didn't understand how wrong it was also when a child did that to you.
Hmm.
I don't know about that, but I do remember always thinking, and even saying through my 20s, when people would ask me, like, does your mom know about everything? And I was like, no, I don't want to hurt her. And I would say, I don't want to hurt her because of the way she reacted before. And I'm like, and there was nothing she could have done. She couldn't have stopped the babysitter. She couldn't have stopped the stranger. And once I got pregnant and really started looking at it from that parent, I realized how much she really could have done. And I realized how much she did it and what other choices she had made that probably led to me not speaking up because so although my parents were divorced, they sent me my dad and my uncle shared a room at my grandma's house. So they sent me right back. My mom didn't tell my dad you need to move out. Cops went over there and everything, but nobody said like you need to move out or he needs to move out or she can't come over here anymore. No, it was just my dad worked graveyard, so it was like, all right, so when you go to work, just make sure you pick her up and you take her to your mom's bed so she's not in the same room with him alone. But he was still 10 feet away from us,
Right.
sleeping. So that could be another reason why I didn't speak up about the babysitters because I was set right back. And an incident actually did happen with the violent babysitter where she was fired for like 3 months, and then I guess they were in a bind and they had her come right back over one more time, which I'm like, again, then as a parent, I'm pregnant. I'm like, I would never. Like, how do you even think of that? How do you not call off of work, even if it means losing your job? Like, why would you even put your, like, they didn't know about the sexual abuse, but again, a big enough situation had happened
Okay.
that I'm like, why did you guys call her back up, even if it was for a day? You were putting kids to, and again, so that was the second time I kind of feel like I was left to fend for myself. So when the others even happened by the time I was 9, it's like, I got this. I'll handle it myself, I guess.
And
I guess
and
it's what
it probably maybe speaks to your resilience as well. That I got this kind of thing. You don't. You're 9, right? You think you have the resources, but you don't. And I do think it's really fascinating for people to understand that how the narrative changes when you see it through a different lens, right? That the lens was I'm now a mom, and what does moms do? And like you
it's
said, got frustrated, angry. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the dynamic changed with your own mom because of the expectations that you had for her that you think you would do differently if you had the if well, let's hope you never have the opportunity, but
right.
even having the discussion. I mean, I know as a therapist and doing this my entire career before I had children, it was a very open conversation in our household, and the whole debate of even letting them spend the night over at friends' houses, like, because we know that that's sometimes where this stuff occurs. And so being transparent, like, hey, this stuff happens. I had no problem sharing that with my kids, developmentally appropriate, right? It never got into details, but we talked about touch and what's okay and what's not. And fortunately they had me as a therapist, therapist as a dad to be able to navigate these things. But I think it's really important for people to understand how, because there are a lot of people that the whole concept of post-traumatic stress disorder is it's post-trauma. So it doesn't mean it happens immediately afterwards. I mean, I have a gentleman I'm working with right now. It was 50 years, literally 50 years before he recalled what happened. What happened to him happened at 15, and he didn't recall until he was 65. And it
Wow.
was because of a lens issue, very similar to yours. He saw the situation predicament that he was in through a different set of lenses, and for whatever reason, that caused this memory to percolate up. And then, of course, there was the fallout of that. But it is important for people to understand that is the essence of PTSD. It can happen 20 years later, like in your
Yeah.
particular 30 years later.
Yeah. And I didn't even realize that non-war vets could have, PTSD.
Really?
And I don't think I really realized it until I think maybe about 3 years ago. And that's when I started again. So I had a wave of new triggers with each pregnancy. And then I stopped therapy for a little bit because just motherhood and fitting all of that in, and it was getting cuckoo. But then I had to go back, or because, and then this is how I got into the public speaking too. Um, so my youngest, she was about to turn 4, and then the middle one was 6, and then the oldest was 9. So they were all hitting ages that were significant in my trauma. My
Wow.
daughter was hitting the age of when my memories have started. My 6-year-old actually was reminding me of, and then it brought out how much more trauma I really endured through my teens with the verbal abuse, and even um, witnessing abuse, uh, how harsh my stepfather was to his son, he's my brother. He will forever be my brother. There was, so my 6-year-old reminded me a lot of my brother. So all of these things came back where I was like, oh my gosh, he wouldn't have been allowed to do that as a little one. He wouldn't have been allowed to have fun like that. And then my oldest, he was reaching the age of where the last of my abuse happened. So that was bringing up a whole new set of triggers. And then that's when that therapist was like, you have PTSD. And I said, what? I'm like, I was like, I didn't know. And because of that, again, trying to find, I was starting to panic because I realized, oh my gosh, this could have happened already to my oldest. And I didn't quite know how to talk to him about it without leading questions, without putting ideas in his mind. I didn't know, and we'd always, I had him to the point where it was kind of crazy, where he was so afraid to even go to the doctor because I'd be like, nobody looks at your private body parts. Nobody looks at you down here. But I was doing it in a way where I was terrifying my kids. So again, I was like, all right, I don't want to do that. And I was finding books, but they just weren't cutting it for me. They still felt off.
Scary.
And through TikTok, I found my coworker, and she's now a really good friend of mine, Deanna. She's at Deanna Hines. She's been with Victor Pacini in Childhood Victories since I think 2014, if I'm correct. Um, she's a speaker. She has spoken to thousands and thousands of children over the course of the years. They're really big in Illinois. They do stuff in California and Iowa. Um, and so I was watching her one night and asked her like what she did, and she told me. And then I was like, I need to talk to my kids about this, and I don't know how. And my oldest was starting to go into the realm of, oh mom, you just worry too much. Oh mom, and so she's like, oh, my boss wrote this book. So I ordered the book, Be Seen and Heard, and 4 simple rules that little boy has for you to keep your body safe. So the book is about little boy and
Hmm.
the unsafe secret he kept. And I was able, and that's the exact book we use in the curriculum, but I used that first I read it to my kids because it's baby enough for Nayeli. At the time was 3.5. It was, Jackson still wasn't quite at that age where we could flat out be like, oh, sexual abuse, or I think at some point I still called it that way with him. And that's when I realized, like, no, I still need to find a softer way because he is only 9.
Hmm.
And then it served as a perfect way for me to segue because there's a little girl in the book too. So I was able to say, I'm little girl. I was little girl. And again, that's something that we do during our presentation. Not until a little bit older, 5th grade, I believe, is when we actually say, hey, little girl in that book represents me.
Wow.
And so yeah, so we've been
I
working on this. I met them. I was like, oh my gosh, you guys have a Spanish presenter, because that's the other part too. In the Latin Hispanic community, although it's such a big taboo in all communities, there is still, like, for example, the tradition of greeting everyone with that hug. So,
right.
although my entire family knew about my uncle's abuse and how he abused me, at every party, I was supposed to go out of respect and give him that hug and kiss. And it's so ingrained in me that I even did it the last time I saw him, the summer of 2020. Like, it's just so weird, even though, like, it's weird, right? I guess I still know how to put that, how to
Dissociate.
make that, box it up. I
Yep.
guess when I have to, I don't know.
But it does speak to those cultural elements, and the other thing I want to applaud you or your group about is that emotions are contained in our native language. And so if you're going to, and we learn best when it's emotional. So a story like this should be done in an emotional way in the child's native language. They are much more likely to remember it and believe you as the person who's sharing it when you are speaking their language. If I were to do it, it doesn't have the same impact. And the fact that you, and I respect the fact that you wait until fifth grade, right? Because we don't want kids to worry about you either,
Yep.
but share like I am that girl again from that emotional element. You humanize the experience because it can happen to anyone. It happened to me, and that becomes such a powerful tool. And so that's specifically how your program is run. So all presenters.
Yes, Victor, I mean, that's all by design. When we bring that up, Victor wrote that up. He's an amazing man. And like I said, he's also a survivor. He was 8 when he was sexually abused, and he's been able to turn this into this crazy, amazing curriculum. And a fun fact about Victor, he was an Elvis impersonator when he was 4 years old and traveled the country. And so he
Performer.
also, we sing a couple songs. He wrote those songs. He wrote the curriculum. He's incredibly talented. He's
Is
yeah,
he
this is all his design. And then now I am helping translate all these things into Spanish. And like you were saying about the whole being in the native language, next month I have my first full day of presentations, and it's all going to be in Spanish to kids. And I am preparing myself for a very, very emotional day, because there's that. Like, I haven't been able, I'm not at the point in my healing yet where I've been able to do my TikToks in Spanish, because the one day that I tried, it was, again, another trigger. Because all that was happening to me, it was all in Spanish. That was all I knew. Like, it just brings it. Yes, it. So that's I'm preparing myself with therapy, with that. I'm gonna be well rested. I'm gonna set myself up for success that full day and after, because I know it'll be emotional. And but I'm excited for it. I'm very excited to get in front of the kids,
and it's okay.
because
Your first group, are they older kids or are they younger kids?
I'm going to be doing, if I'm correct, I think I'm doing kindergarten all the way to 8th grade, or maybe to 5th grade. I'm not really sure, but I'm practicing tomorrow. I'm presenting, going over grade 3 and 4 with my boss, so we can tighten it up, clean it up a little bit more in English, and then I can just focus for the next month. Because it's going to be the April 4th. So I will focus the next month on translating everything into Spanish and just practicing more to get it more flowing. Because I work with slides too. And that's something, I've been a blackjack
So,
dealer for 16 years. I don't work with slides. So I got to make sure all those kinks are out. Well, again, I will give myself grace for little mistakes or whatnot, but it's going to be live streamed. I'll be doing it from Vegas. It's going to be for a school in Illinois, and I'm
That
super
I
excited.
would suggest is just because you are a natural compartmentalizer, show up as mom.
Oh,
And I think because since that's really where your strongest lens is, right? That's when you kind of get your groove on. If you think
mm-hmm.
I am the mom of these kids, I am the mom to teach you guys this. It probably will go into a different part of your brain so that even though you're speaking in Spanish, do you speak? I'm assuming you speak Spanish to
Oh,
your child.
yes. Read
So
and speak.
I think you would be. That's probably where you will be the strongest. And if you stay, I'm mom today, and I'm gonna be. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to say it out loud, just as long
No,
as.
right.
But it
Oh,
probably
yeah.
more empowerment role as opposed to it resonating with that emotionality because that can be difficult.
Okay, awesome. Great for the, yeah,
Reason
great tip.
on the dandelion and the orchid. I do this, and it's about resiliency. And so, dandelion, can grow in the crack of a sidewalk. Doesn't need a lot of dirt or water. They are just naturally resilient. Whereas an orchid, they need the right temperature, the right water, the right amount of light in order to be able to blossom. And so I compare it with my brother, and I don't know if you know, but I lost my brother to suicide.
Mhm.
And so he clearly is the orchid. And the very first time I've done this metaphor thousands of times in therapy, but I've never done it. I never did it in public speaking. And the first time I did it in public speaking, I broke down. I couldn't get through it because it was the first time that I was up there as me as opposed to this metaphor. I always used the metaphor.
Um,
I'd never shared about my brother before. My clients didn't know that that's really what the metaphor was about. But I was trying to connect to my audience by being more human. And so I used the story about how he handled there were particular events in our lives and how I handled it versus how he handled it, the dandelion versus the orchid. And I just completely broke down. But it actually humanized. Now this was an adult audience, so they
right.
always public speaker. I've always been known for public speaking, but I never speak about myself. I always, have these lots of other things that I talk about, but not that. So I wish I had had that resource. Like, what role was I in that day? And maybe, I mean,
Hmm.
though I think I actually gained a lot of respect from my colleagues because I'm such a stoic person naturally.
Hmm.
But it's such an interesting experience when you start public speaking, and you will get much out of it. You will love it. You will thrive off the audience, and even on streaming, you will feel their energy. It's more powerful in person, but you will definitely feel it in Illinois as well. And so, congratulations to you to
Thank
use
you.
your story right from that empowerment lens, which is really why I do these interviews. I do these interviews specifically so that people know that they can recover because there's somewhat of a narrative out there that you're victimized for life, and it doesn't have to be that way. Does it have an impact on you? Sure, but you can recover and you can grow. The whole concept of post traumatic growth, and
Yes.
your boss clearly is a huge example of that, but you are as well.
Yes, he is. And something that he also has a podcast with that we say every day. It's called Healing Every Day.
Mm.
And that is basically what it is, because there was a time where I felt, I think when I got pregnant, when the triggers came back, when the kids were getting a little bit older, and that all came back strong, I felt like I let myself down. I was like, I went to therapy. What is going on? Without realizing that, every season of my life, I don't know if they're going to come. I hadn't been a mother of one before. I hadn't been a mother of two. I hadn't been a mother to a daughter. So I, the concept, I had been stuck at, I'm supposed to be healed, instead of realizing, yes, the healing every day, because you never know what's going to trigger you sometimes. You learn how to, or at least I've learned how to work through it better, but it
Yeah.
still affects me. It still creeps in. It still, um, yeah, it still pops up because the kids hitting different stages, different ages, different, all of that.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I tell my clients when, and I work mainly with men, and men in therapy, that they don't always match. So they are ready, like, "Okay, get to work, Jeff, do your thing, and get me out of here." And I say, I'm very frank with them right up front. It's like, it usually takes about a year for us to actually resolve the PTSD symptoms, and almost always about the year mark we have that kind of conversation of, okay, so the PTSD is gone, the hypervigilant is gone, you can sleep at night, you can be more present, that you can have, there's spaces in which you can be vulnerable. However, it still impacts you. And so we can end and graduate, or we can move into phase two and do more of the nuanced aspects of trauma. And that really is a lifelong journey. And that's my men's group, because the men's group gives them the space to be able to hear stories or experience things that they never would themselves, but it gives them a chance to kind of process, like, well, if I were to go through that, now how would I go about handling it? And that's usually where I transition my guys from an individual, because I do individual and group, and then they just do group, and they can continue on and that, and it's just such a powerful modality.
I will say, yes, that was the other thing that I discovered through TikTok, was group therapy. And also how it was weird because I kept connecting with Deanna in different ways, and then realized, oh my gosh, because I'd been following these lives of um, women survivors, and then but I was following a different host, and then one night realized that Deanna was streaming the same thing, and then so I started attending these groups, and it took me a few months before I started speaking up. But once I started just going, it changed for me so much. Along with therapy, it was a game changer for me, just being around a group of people that truly, because I felt crazy sometimes. I felt like I was purposely holding on to these negative angry thoughts or the things that had happened to self-sabotage, but not realizing that that's the natural part of living through trauma, I guess, and
Not feeling
going.
worth it, so we self-sabotage it. Yes, that is not uncommon. So let me reflect. You can check with your people, but I'm going to check to see, do we have any questions, Dylan or Annette?
Oh no, I'm sorry you froze on that one.
I was just asking my moderators if they had any questions. It looks like someone did have a question. Apple of my eye.
Okay, what did apple of my eye ask?
I think we're waiting to see if they're still in the room. He's not sure that he's still on that Apple of my.
Oh, oh, she was talking about the trusted and neutral trusted hero. So one of the things that
Okay.
Victor came up with in the curriculum is the trusted heroes. So we go through who do you normally open up to when you have an unsafe secret? If you're at home, you've got your mom, you've got your dad, maybe some of you it's your grandparents. Well, what if you're not at home? What if you're not around the people that you love? So then that's when we introduce that your trusted heroes could also be your teacher, the nurse, another student even. So that was another fun part about that curriculum that I think is really great. And that's even something that I've told my kids, because even my oldest, I did get him a therapist. We think he has inattentive ADHD, but I was noticing that he was having anxiety, and not only through that, but the fear of, did I traumatize my kids too? Have I ruined them? I feel like they need someone to talk to outside of us, someone they can trust, someone that, because I'm gonna mess up. So I wanted to have another trusted hero, which was a
I,
therapist, and so they know that at school too.
I'm going to borrow that from him. Um, the So the question was, have you spoken to your uncle? Have you confronted your uncle as an adult to hold him accountable?
So no, and this is something that because I can drive 30 minutes, not even 30 minutes, depending on how bad traffic is, and go do it. And I still haven't figured out how. I don't know if I want to do it alone. I don't know if I want to record it. I don't know if I want to have an aunt there with me or a cousin. The other thing is, so he was a terrible alcoholic also. And from that alcoholism, gave himself diabetes. He's in a wheelchair because he's lost a leg due to the diabetes also. And mentally, I think also just the alcohol has really messed with his mind. But and he's always, I don't know, he was always the weird uncle, the creepy one, the one that was a little off. And for many years there, he was also the one, his mouth, like he would go to at bars, he was always getting beat up. And a lot of the head trauma from being beat up, there was one year where he was beat up like 4 or 5 times. It was so crazy. Um, he, I think that's damaged his brain. So there's part of me that wonders if he would even know. But I want to, and I have to do it soon because he's not in good health. He goes to kidney dialysis and all this stuff. I, I, I do, and then I think also I'm trying to figure out what I want from it,
Well, I
from
was
that visit.
before, I always tell my clients that you need to have a clear expectation of what you want from it because you're not likely to get it. Because probably the number one thing
Right.
I have clients that ask is they want the person to be accountable, and that is not likely. I mean, I've had a couple of situations where that happened, but most of the time it's like, oh, you misunderstood. That wasn't really what was happening. And so, and we practice in therapy, like, okay, if you hear this, how are you going to manage it? What is, because sometimes it's just about, I need to speak my truth. I know that you're not going to hear that or own it, and if you truly believe that, you can achieve that. But if you're expecting something, some kind of reconciliation it rarely happens. And so you got to be clear about that because it's hard. It's really hard. And so like what you have done, what I applaud you is you managed to get your voice in a very different way. And to be able to, one of the things one of my little sayings is about you either transform trauma or we transmit trauma, right? Transmitting is we do the same thing that was done to us to our children. You clearly transformed it. And it was one of the things that I remember in talking to my kids. When my kids would get mad at me, I would say to them, save it for your therapist. Because I know I'm going to screw up, but I know that I did better than my parents. That
Yeah,
I can, I did better. I know that I screwed up, but I definitely, definitely did better than where I came from. And that is a legacy worth having. And so,
absolutely. And another big deal to me too, talking about not knowing, not sure what you want out of a conversation, and where I've got to get myself to also maybe just the point of, okay, I'll say this and we'll see what happens. Because I had to get to that point with my mom also because I got so angry.
yeah,
And I didn't know what I wanted to hear from her. I didn't know what so I needed to I had decided I was going to disclose all the other, because in her mind it was always like, oh, we kept you guys safe, we kept you guys safe. And then it was like, look, and then she was surprised. She's like, and it all happened under our nose. Like, it wasn't at the friend's house, it was all people that we trusted, that they put me in their hands. But the thing that my mom said to me, and I didn't know I needed to hear it at the time, was I didn't protect you, and I promise. And I was pregnant. She put her hand on my stomach and held my hand and her hand on my stomach and just said, I promise to protect him in the way I never protected you. And she has done that. She has, as I've discovered more ways that she let me down, and I've let her know about it, she's owned up to it. And she made those changes or learned more, like, very much since my kids were born. Okay, how do I talk to them? What do we need to do? Very adamant with the vagina and the penis, and very, they followed that. And my mom has always been very, she's always been very respectful of my parenting style. So that's again another support system there that has helped.
yeah, that's
So.
humble is what I it's I'm working on my dissertation, and I've identified these 14 characteristics, and humility is one of them, that we heal in context of relationships. And when someone can be humble and own their mistakes, right? And she actually is leaning on you to be the expert, because frankly you are in this particular situation, but she trusts you as the right. Even in your culture, right, we know that age matters, and yet she's
Yes.
giving you respect even though you were younger than her. So one of the
Yep.
was about the moral development. So it's Kohlberg, Kholberg, Kohlberg's theory on
Oh,
moral development. I don't know them off the top of my head. I just happen to know the first one and the last one, but I don't know the second one. So someone could Google it if they want. But that's the that those are the six stages, or the three stages with the two subcategories. And really, I can't. It's been a while since I taught that, so I'm not remembering. I don't use it that much. They also, someone was suggesting that instead of confronting, you can write a letter, right? A way to be able to speak your truth without having to have the response back. So I'm sure you've heard that one before, and I agree that definitely can be. It's really about the thought of what is it that you want out of it, and and how do you achieve that in the best way possible, and that right have a reliable source that can help you through that story is very helpful.
yes.
Uh,
I haven't thought about the writing the letter because I've thought about writing. My father passed away. He was a fierce alcoholic and he was only 42. So, because he never asked, he never, and it was his brother, he never, nothing. So my therapist has suggested writing him a letter, um, but never my uncle. I wonder if he would read it. I don't know. That's a good one. Or even just writing it down so I have something
Absolutely.
so that I can stay on track too. But that's a good suggestion. Thank you, whoever suggested that. Yeah, that's a good one. It's a good one. Well, I have got to jump off. My daughter is done in gymnastics. I could talk for hours. I have no
Thank
problem talking.
you so much for sharing your story. I probably will make some TikToks out of this. You had some really great
So,
points I want to share, and I'll just tag you in it so you can see it as well. But thank
okay,
you.
sounds great.
I greatly appreciate it. This was a wonderful interview.
Thank you. And thank you, my friends that hopped on tonight, and my moderators that helped out. Love
Yeah.
you all. Bye.
Hug your daughter.
I